Hey everyone, this is George Couros. This is iMOOC Season 3, Episode 5, and we are very lucky to have my friend Katie Martin and my other friend Dwight _Carter, so don't get them mixed up. We were just talking about that. Two amazing educational leaders, and we're really excited to highlight some of Dwight's work. And this week for the iMOOC assignments, we're actually focused on part 3, and we're going to kind of interweave that into the conversation. But Dwight, not only is he an amazing educational leader, he's the author of 2 books, one that is out already and one that is coming out very soon. And seriously, anything you can learn from Dwight, you want to learn. So I encourage you to look those books up and see what he's doing. Before I turn it over to Katie, I just want to thank people. The Innovator's Mindset audiobook came out yesterday, and people have been extremely supportive. And so it already hit #1 on Amazon for education administration. So I just want to thank people for that. Because that was a terrifying thing for me to do. And seriously, it was like being in The Shining. It was like the weirdest experience to just sit in a room by yourself and read into a mic. So I just want to thank people, not only a lot of people bought it, and no, I'm not asking anyone to buy it, but more importantly, people were just so supportive and thankful, and just kind about the whole thing. So I just really want to thank people for that. But I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and then she's going to turn it over to the awesome Dwight.
Thanks, George. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm Katie Martin, and again, super excited to be here for our 5th episode of Season 3. I just want to also acknowledge that today is about 2 years since the Innovator's Mindset came out. And I was telling George earlier that it's great to have the audiobook come out, but super inspiring to see the change that the book and George's work have inspired over the last 2 years. So it's a happy birthday to the Innovator's Mindset today. And a great way to celebrate with all of you tonight. We should have had a birthday cake. But anyway.
How about a pumpkin?
Perfect. Thanks, Dwight. We knew we could count on you. So in honor of that, just really happy that everyone's here and super excited for a great conversation tonight. We are 2 weeks left to go, and I encourage everyone to continue to blog and share and keep connecting. It's going to be a great 2 weeks to finish strong and finish the whole 6 weeks. So we have lots of inspiration tonight. I know Dwight is going to share some of his experiences, talk about his book, talk about change and his own leadership. So I am excited to have Dwight, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're from.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, Katie. Hello, George. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. George is one of my all-time education heroes. I look up to him. He was one of the first guys I connected with on Twitter like 7 years ago. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But again, I'm a high school principal in New Albany, Ohio, which is a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, which is about 7 miles outside of Columbus. This is my 24th year as an educator, and out of those 24 years, I've been an administrator for 16 years. This is my 4th year as a principal at New Albany High School. New Albany is about almost 1,600 students, very high affluent, high achieving school district. We have about just shy of 5,000 students total in the district. So I'm the high school principal, and we have 1 high school, 1 middle school, 1 intermediate school, and elementary school. And we now have a pre-K and kindergarten facility. And the unique thing about our campus is everything is on one area, one campus. So we're connected by 1 large sidewalk. So we're a very close-knit group, very strong core values. Recently, you're going through some changes with our administration. So we have a new superintendent going into the 2nd year, and it's just been revigorating for the district as a whole.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. My staff and I are really starting to gel going into the 4th year. So that it feels real good that we're starting off, and we have that trust that's in place. Relationships with the kids are solid. So it's been a good transition going to year 4, and I have a brand new administrative team as well in the building. So we're hitting on all cylinders and having a great time doing it.
And one of the reasons I asked Dwight is not only because of his knowledge, but the just connecting with him he is so passionate about what he does and very thoughtful, and just kind of following along on Twitter and following through his blog, his positivity. And I actually want to just bring up something that sparked in me when Dwight and I, we connected through Twitter for a little while, and out of the blue, I don't know if you remember this, Dwight, he just messaged me. He's like, "Hey, can I call you?"
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah. And so we just talked on the phone, and it's just kind of neat because a lot of people don't actually understand, if you don't do it, how, like, people will say, like, oh, like, you know, online it's almost like fake. And the reality is, if you make it real, it becomes real. And
yeah, it's very authentic.
Yeah. And do you remember, like, I don't want to talk about what we talked about in the conversation, but do you remember that actually when that happened? Because I don't think we ever actually met face to face.
No,
at the point. We
met face to face probably 2 years, maybe 3 years after we really connected on Twitter. It was at a conference we met, and then you came to Cincinnati or the Ohio area. Mm-hmm. That was the first time we actually were at the same conference together. But I also remember I connected with you because I said, how do I join Connected Principles? And then you sent me some information, and from there I started talking to you about, you know, what's it like you're leading elementary schools and blogging and all the things that you were doing. I'm like, man, this guy is like, he's nuts, man. And I just learned so much about your school and you through Twitter that it was easy to connect with you.
Yeah, and one of the things, Katie just dropped out of the stream. I'm sure she just had a little technical difficulties. She'll be back right away. But one of the things that you just brought up, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this, because we talk about the importance of building culture, and, you know, like how, like, if you're really effective at what you do, you will, you know, like a culture will last without you. And mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true. I really don't. And the reason why I say that is literally one person can come in the right role and change everything. And
absolutely.
And positive and negative. And like, what are your thoughts on that? Because that is like a really huge thing.
Well, I struggle with that because, again, culture is a really big thing for me. And it's big because of culture. You don't get culture right, nothing else falls into place. I've experienced that. I've lived it. I've witnessed it. I've been a part of it one way or the other. And I struggle with it because there's so much pressure knowing that the belief is culture should be sustainable without you there in that seat. But also culture is about the personality of the schools, about the personality of the leadership, about the personality of the staff. And people follow personalities. They follow people. They don't follow organizations. And organizations are what make up people. So people are loyal to others, not to just a brand. Mm-hmm. And schools are the same way. And knowing the pressure of the importance of culture building as a principal, like every interaction is either adding to or taking away from the culture. Everything you say is adding to or taking away from the culture. When you leave, that part leaves with you. And some elements I think can be sustainable, but the whole culture in and of itself will change because the leadership is going to change. So I think there's a combination of, yes, you can lead it and it can be sustainable, but there's some things that are inevitably going to change because somebody else will come in, have their own ideas, have their own philosophies, their own core values, unless they truly vet the interview process and hire somebody that's just like the culture that exists.
Well, I think that, like, when I became a principal, my superintendent at the time, who was absolutely phenomenal, she said that what you need to do is you need to actually build upon what has already been there. Right. And when you leave, your fingerprint should be all over the place, but there will be an adjustment when the next person comes in too, right?
Absolutely.
And so it does permeate, but I know personally as an educator, if I have a boss and they totally disagree with everything that was done before, and I work with that person, I want that person to be happy with the work that I'm doing. And so very quickly, if that person maybe doesn't have the best vision, a lot of people, like I hear a lot of teachers complain and say, this really sucks, and like I don't have a choice. And I'm like, well, you always have a choice. Like you can go, you can leave and go somewhere else. And that is like, sometimes when you stay in spite of weak leadership. If everyone started leaving, that would also send a very clear message on something that's not working as well.
Had that same conversation. We had that conversation a couple years ago. Because I wrote a blog about, I had a phenomenal first or second year teacher. We had a conversation, and she came to my office, and she started crying. It's like, I just want to let you know I'm going to this district, a smaller district. I'm like, well, why? What's going on? She said, well, just personally, it just wasn't a good fit for me here. I love the kids. She said, but it's just, I need a smaller school. And that hit me hard because that was the first or second time I had someone from my staff leave and go to another school. I took that personally. Mm-hmm. I remember I wrote a blog about it, and then you reached out to me and said, hey, don't take it so hard. Sometimes people leave just because they want to leave in something different. It's not necessarily because of you. And there's this quote that I read somewhere that people don't leave organizations or schools, they leave people. So I took that to heart, like, oh, she left because there was something lacking in my leadership that didn't keep her there. And then you reassured me that, hey, man, things happen. Don't worry about it. If you have a mass exodus, then you need to worry. But
that's you. That's probably you.
Yeah, if one person leaves, hey, things like that happen. So.
Well, and that's interesting too, because you're being reflective. I think too often leaders think it's about them and don't often reflect if people are leaving. So I love that you're thinking about that.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier, and I think George mentioned this, that you're super positive and you obviously care a lot about relationships. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, when people talk about administration as the dark side, or they say like you're going over, and you said you've been in administration for 16 years. How do you fight that, or what do you do to change that narrative?
Well, I went through a very challenging time last school year, and we had a Gallup survey on school culture and climate, and wow, it was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. It was I had to lick my wounds and really heal this summer, and I realized the things that I thought I was doing were actually the things I was doing. I thought I was building culture, but actually I was tearing it down because I wasn't visible. I wasn't mentally present. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I wasn't engaging to the staff, and I was very much student centered, but I forgot about the 2/3 of the stakeholders, which are our staff and our parents. And so getting that feedback, I could have very easily gotten defensive, started to deflect, started to complain, started to blame others, but I had to look internally and just say, well, what can I do to get better? So we started working on some leadership skills and leadership development, started reading a lot more. And then I just actually stepped back and stopped doing anything at all and started thinking, okay, only thing I can control is myself. So how do I get better? And what can I do to get better? So I put a nice little plan in place, was very honest with my staff on the first day. It's like, here's the feedback that you gave me from this survey. And I talked about like bullet points, like every single area. And it was refreshing. And I got a lot of positive feedback. Like, man, you were very vulnerable and very transparent. We appreciate that. The next thing, I just had to follow through with the things that I said I was going to do. So I didn't overpromise. I just said, here are the things I'm going to stop doing. Here's the things I'm going to start doing. And now I built relationships by just stopping by to say hi. I invite our new staff out. We go to Panera, which is a little sandwich shop. We go once a month. We now have something called Appy Hours, where I buy the appetizers for each department per month. And in the department, they'll come, and anybody can come in that department, and they'll get their own drinks and whatnot. So it's just building relationships that has nothing to do with content or curriculum or the school itself. It's just like getting to know people and building relationships. So those have been actually very, very productive.
And that's I'm just amazed that you shared that. So I appreciate that. And I think that's a really great sign of leadership, is that vulnerability. And I know, I'm pretty sure, Katie, you've read Brene Brown stuff, and lots of people will bring that up because I think it is quite important, is that when we ask people to grow, but they don't see us growing as well, you lose people. And I think that one of the things that you shared just when you were talking right now that kind of struck a chord with me is that we do often talk about, serving kids, and, it's all about the kids, and we start there first. And I think it is important that we understand that serving the adults is serving the kids.
Yes.
And if you actually, if you look at any airline company, and this is the way I always see this, any airline company, you'll go on United, like there's actually something they were saying about how, United is focused on customers first. And somebody posted a video of everyone on the plane laughing after like a 3-hour mechanical delay. Like, are you kidding? Like, you don't ever put us first, right?
Right.
And the thing is, a lot of times when I deal with airline companies, the people that are right there in the front lines cannot make decisions because they have to go up the ranks to do this. And so when you basically handcuff those people to not be able to, use common sense, to figure out everything has to be there, then ultimately the customer does suffer. And I think that's a really important aspect of what you shared, is that, and I know that I'm guilty of this too, is that I always talk about students, but it is ultimately how do we help the adults? And I try to advocate, administrators, like, you gotta, I just wrote a post about this, about how we hold back our teachers from making the right decisions based on, policy, and how, I always say, if common sense trumps policy, your policy is stupid. Like, I leave that straight up, right? Like,
so I think the important part, that's George Eloquent. I think the important part too, which you said, that resonates with me, Dwight, because I had a similar experience. You thought you were doing what was right, and you were, you thought you were connected, but until we get feedback from those we serve, we don't always know. And when I first moved into administrative role, I thought I had great relationships. We were friends. I had been working with my team. And then all of a sudden, things that I was doing were perceived differently. And I had the best intentions in mind, for sure. I really wanted to do good work, but it wasn't always received in the way that I thought it was. And until I asked for feedback, or until it was given, I didn't really understand the impact or the lack of impact I was having with my decisions. And so I think that it's really important that you said you had that Gallup survey, you asked for feedback, and people are really afraid to do that. So I'm wondering too, like, how do you continue to seek feedback once you got that the initial results? How do you continue to stay in contact with people?
Again, based on that feedback, one of the things I wanted to do is really stay connected to my team leaders, or building leadership teams. So now we have weekly checkups with our department chairs. By saying we, I mean every one of my administrative team. So all the departments I evaluate, I meet with their chairperson every single week, and it's just, how's things going? What can I do to help? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? What's going on in the department that we can work on? It doesn't fester. So it doesn't. And,
the dogs want to say hi. And
that's been very positive as well. We're also going to, as a district, going to roll out a quarterly, like a 10, 12 question checkup. When have you been recognized by administration the last 30 days? Have you received any feedback about your work the last 30 days? Have you had a one-on-one conversation with a leader in the building in the last 30 days? Just basic questions like that. So we can just gauge and almost do a summative assessment on how we're doing. Because the bad part about the Gallup survey was that it was an autopsy. It was an autopsy of the year. Like, we couldn't go back and fix or change or solve anything. But I had to wait like 9 weeks over the summer to get the staff back to then address what was shared, come up with a plan, and then implement it. Now we can at least get some quarterly feedback where it gives us a chance the next day to implement some things and work on some things. So, and then I just ask for feedback from, some of the teachers in the building, like, man, how are things going? What are you hearing? And some's like, man, we haven't seen you in a week. You make sure you're out and about. Or they say, hey, man, thanks for stopping by the classroom and leaving a note, or send me that email. So just stop having the casual walking conversations as opposed to a formal agenda type meeting. It's just casual, laid back, and very informal.
Nice. And I think that you've obviously opened up the lines of communication for them to say things to you, and they know you're receptive to feedback, and then they want to share.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier, you have been leading for a long time and at the school for 4 years, and you have a book coming out. We'd love to hear a little bit about the book and kind of what what the driver was for lessons learned.
And Dwight, if you could actually, I would love everyone to know about your first book that came out about learning spaces. So if you could share that first, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into the one that's coming out right away.
All right. Well, the first book is co-written with Mark White and Gary Seebach. Mark White is one of my best friends, mentor, just a phenomenal leader. He's the main writer, and Gary Seebach was the architect of Clark Hall, which is our extension or annex to Lincoln High School when I was there. We just talked about the mindset shift that has to occur before you even start thinking about and implementing new things in classrooms. Your mindset has to change first. So that's the uniqueness of the title, is what's in your space. So what's in the space between your ears and what's in the space in your learning environment. So we talked about our process. We talked about the steps we took to get teachers engaged in the professional development, the books that we read, connected all the learning that took place over the last 10 years while we were in Gehenna, and now how it culminated into designing a new space for 21st century learners. Because we can very easily just build another massive high school, lockers, cafeteria, auditorium. It looks like everything else. But I don't think that's the way of the world in the future. I think we're going to go to smaller, more flexible, more agile spaces. And so the first book talks about how to go about doing that. And then we share stories from people all over the country, from elementary, middle, and high school teachers and administrators on how they did it. And the whole premise is, think about what type of learning you want to see happen, get the kids involved, and then adapt the learning environment to allow that to happen, as opposed to buying new furniture, painting the walls, putting all this artwork up, but the pedagogy doesn't change. What's the point of that? So
Thank you.
We look at it from, let's think innovatively about the space, but let's think how we want teaching and learning to take place, and then make the space fit that.
How did you work with teachers, and how did you help them understand the pedagogy and how that was going to change in conjunction with the space?
Yeah, it was about a 2 or 3 year process. Like, we did some book studies. We sent a group of teachers to PBL training so they can understand what that goes into and what that looks like. We had book studies. We had article discussions. We met on a monthly basis and just talked about what you want to do and why you want to do it. And let's just not talk about integrating or becoming a Google school or Google Classroom, but what do you want to do with that? And then we let teachers just explore and share ideas. And so that sharing is what built that community and that collaboration, because teachers felt like they weren't on an island. And then once we got the space, they were already in the mindset of, I'm ready for this space, and let's just make it happen. And the kids saw it, and they lost their minds. They absolutely lost their minds. What was funny is, like, the seniors didn't like it at first, because they felt like they didn't get it, because they experienced school the same way for 12 or 13 years, if you count kindergarten. So they didn't get it while we were building it. And some of them were somewhat turned off by the idea. But it wasn't until they actually walked in the building where they was like, man, this makes sense. And I knew we had them. I knew we had our younger kids within the first quarter when they said, man, I feel like I'm in college. And I thought that was interesting. I said, well, how do you know if you've never been there? He's like, well, I feel like this is what college would be like, because they had a lot of freedom, but there was a great deal of responsibility that came with it.
I think one of I really appreciate, because the book isn't just about learning spaces, right? It is a shift in thinking. And I think obviously that's not like a major theme of the innovator's mindset, but when you're talking about that, I was in Australia several years ago, and they actually, to deal with the recession, that happened basically all over the world, one of the things they did was they gave construction companies a lot of money to actually build new school spaces, to not really necessarily help schools, but to actually help local companies, because every town has a school, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating is I would go into some of the most beautiful learning spaces that I've ever seen in my life. And I actually distinctly remember walking into a totally reformed library. like the way that we saw a library when we were kids compared to what this was now, just the
Sure.
seating and all these other things. And I remember I was having a conversation in the library for like about 3 seconds, and I got shushed by the librarian. And so they were using it. They were using the space the exact same way the old space was, and had no shift in thinking.
Yeah.
And so you have this, and like we put all this money into it, but nothing actually changed.
Yeah.
Anik, who's one of the leaders of iMOOC, I worked with her. They have a brand new school, and I said, whatever you do, don't bring your old thinking into a new building.
Right.
And I think that happens way more than we want to admit.
Absolutely. And so sometimes we make the mistake of, if we build something new, it looks brighter, shinier, prettier, cleaner, that automatically things are going to change, and that's not the case at all. The mindset has to change, and you have to train people how to think differently. And you have to think differently in yourself. And how do you do that? Ask questions, read a lot of books, see what else is going on, talk to other people. And then,
well, and I love that's why you brought up the students too, and that they didn't automatically think it was great, because it's not how they are traditionally expected to learn in school. And we forget sometimes, like teachers will say, but my kids want the worksheets. Well, because you've trained them to want them. You've trained them to just go through the motions. And so a lot of times the new space, like you said, doesn't just change that. It might lend itself to new opportunities, but if we don't think differently and create those new opportunities and connect with new people, they don't automatically just happen.
Yeah, when we study like assessment, like why do we assess kids the way we do? What are we trying to get at? Should the assessment or the grade be determined based on time or based on students learning? So we were really pushing the envelope and changing. We had to change how we recorded grades. That comes into, a lot of problems come into that, because you have eligibility deadlines, you have quarter deadlines, you have teachers or parents who want to see their students' grades, and if there were like incompletes in there, it would cause some problems. But the incomplete shows it's just not done yet. There's progress on it, but it's not done yet. We have retakes on tests and quizzes. Kids can do homework for learning, not just for a grade. So we had some quite a bit of unique things going on that was really disruptive, positively disruptive to what we were trying to accomplish.
I'm glad you said that, because homework and grading obviously is a topic that has come up on many of these conversations. And high school is always a place where people say, we can't do this differently. So, when you said you did retakes and allowing kids to show their learning, not just a grade, how are you communicating that to parents, and how are you helping teachers move past the way they've always done that?
Yeah, and the school I'm in now in New Albany, again, going into the 4th year, I have teachers here who've always given retakes, which it was very nice, and because you didn't have to battle that. But it's not across the board. It's like, for example, an entire department may do retakes. And how they do it is the kid still has to go in for some reteaching. So you can't just fail it and then take it again the next day. Obviously something went wrong, so they will look at it, reteach, and then the students can retake it. But it's at a specific time with the teacher. But that's communicated in the beginning of the year with the teachers, expectations. So they talk to parents about that. They post it on the portal. That may have it on Schoology or their Google Classroom. And the students they can choose to take advantage of it. They can choose not to. Like one department I know that does that really well is our global language department. They talk about it collectively as a department every month about their retakes and how kids are taking advantage of it and what they're doing and how they're showing improvement or lack thereof. And so they start really looking at what's the assessment, what are we trying to accomplish, and all that was going on before I got here. And it's just been, my job was not to mess it up. Then, don't get in the way and stop it from happening, because I think it's what's best for kids.
Great. So one of the things you mentioned.
That's okay, Katie. Sorry. Dwight. One of the things that I want to talk about is because I think that book actually goes in nicely to your next book. And so what is the focus on that? I know that one's not out yet, but I think it's coming out pretty soon. Is that true?
It should be out by the end of the month. I know we got an email a couple weeks ago from the publisher, said it's in print. We're going forward. So that was a relief. But this one's about leading schools in disruptive times. As you can tell, just in our nation and in the world in and of itself, things are moving at an exponential rate, and the turnover for principals and superintendents is like 1 to 3 years, maybe 4 years tops. And so, how do you constantly lead in a place that's so in an education system, in a system in of itself that's so disruptive right now, where everything's changing so rapidly, and with the boom in information, how do you stay on top of what's relevant, what's not? And so, our book talks about hot topics such as culture, gender, race, ethnicity, inequalities. We talk about the technology divide. We talk about the multi-generational staff that we have now. We have some boomers, some millennials. How do you get groups like that to work together for a common goal? So we really, really highlight how leaders can lead in a time of disruption, and help leaders understand that disruptive times are going to last for several more decades, because that's just where we are right now. So how do you sustain your mental, physical, and social well-being while leading schools through disruptive times and connecting with kids, building relationships, looking at all the changes that have occurred, going to, from in the States, from No Child Left Behind to now ESSA, and what that entails, going from Ohio State tests, from Ohio graduation tests to state proficiency tests, to just like this whole testing industry. How do you respond to that and still remain relevant and focused on doing what's best for kids? So we tell stories of what other people are doing, and we tell some of our own stories.
So you have definitely taken on quite a bit of challenges by hearing all of those. I'm curious what your 1 to 2 takeaways are that you to share with some of the night. No pressure.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote my technology director, Mike Voss. Love the guy because he's such a critical thinker, and he's very creative. So he has 2 rules, and I'm gonna add a third. The first rule is nothing's ever easy, and the second rule is everything's complicated. And the third rule is that I'll use is just try to maintain positivity throughout the difficult and challenging times. So it's hard to do, but as Todd Whitaker says, when the principal catches a cold, when the principal sneezes, the whole building catches a cold. Man, that is true. So if I'm having a bad day, I'll give you an example today. I was just hoarded in my office, just couldn't get out of my office earlier today. So I just said, we have some books. So let me deliver these books just to get out of my office. And I was still in the focused attention where I wasn't smiling. I was just pushing a cart, just doing a task. So I walked in one of our rooms, and one of our teachers "Hey, Dwight, how you doing?" I'm like, "I'm fine." I didn't smile. I just said, "I'm fine." And then she's like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yeah, I think so." So I just delivered the books and really didn't engage in the conversation. It's like, "All right, I'll see you later." And I was like, "Well, I'm being pretty cold." I realized that. I said, "Well, how was your weekend?" It's like, "Oh, it was fine. It was good." And she can tell I wasn't present. So about an hour later, I got an email from the same teacher. It's like, "Hey, Dwight, you didn't seem like yourself. Are you okay?" And I was like, "Wow, man, she truly cared and recognized that." So I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, "You're right. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't there. I'm sorry, but I'm present now. So my fault. I'll make it up to you." So it was good just to have that personal interaction and that connection. And it showed that my attitude each day does make a difference to somebody. And so that was a great reminder that smile, be positive, live the things that you tweet about, live the things that you use or say every morning on the words of, I'll do the words of wisdom every morning. So I just try to live those things out. And when I'm not, I have 3 people on my team that will definitely remind me, "Dude, you need to press pause and get your mind right, or take a walk or something."
Dwight, I'm going to bring up, what's your tagline in your emails and your Facebook posts?
Be great.
But there's something about choice.
Make it a great day or not. The choice is yours.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I try to get people to understand is that we have way more control over the direction of schools, in our schools than we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of schools that do really amazing things in tough situations, and there's a lot of schools in good situations don't necessarily do good things. And I always, like, I'll try to find a veteran educator, and I'll say, you know, like, how long have you been teaching? And they'll say, like, you know, 25 years. And I'll say, tell me the year that your school said, what are we going to do with all this money we have? Like, it's never happened, right? And so there's always going to be constraints. There's always going to be issues. And I think that's one of the things that people have to understand, is that there will be stress. But there's another point that I want to make, and this isn't something I don't think I've ever said in a podcast or a video, and I think it's really important, is that I always used to tell my teachers this, and I think it's really important, is that if you come to school and physically there's something, I can see something wrong, like, we would tell you to go home, but I can't tell mentally. And so I would rather you stay home for a day and just get your bearings, instead of you being grumpy and hard to deal with for the week. And I think just giving permission to people to that, because we don't put mental health issues as high as we do if we can, as a physical ailment. And I know that some days when I was a principal or a teacher, I used to get just, you know, I'd say, you know, I just needed a day. Like, I just needed a day to, like, catch my breath. And, you know, those are kind of what our sick days are for. And I know that's not, I'm not saying you should have taken the day off. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But I know a lot of people listening, I know that, like, teaching is really hard to miss a day, because it's like you actually add another day onto work to create sub-plans and to do all those other things. Right. But I just want to people encourage, like, how important, like, mental health is to serving your students. And sometimes you just need that. I just need a breath. Like, you just need some space to catch your breath, and when you come back, it'll be better. And so I
like you, I encourage the staff the same thing. Like, take a day. Like, things aren't right, just take a day, and it's going to be okay. And I learned that when I was in the classroom. I had a double hernia surgery back in '97, and then I spent probably 4 weeks getting my plans together for being out for 3 weeks. I mean, it was like a college course. When I came back, the building was still standing, the kids were fine, we were supposed to be, had to do some reteaching, but everything was okay. I mean, everything was fine. And that's when I really realized that if I miss a day here, or miss a day here because I have to, things will be okay. It truly will be okay.
You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to go back to your story, Dwight. I really love that the teacher could say to you and check in on you and see if you were okay. Yeah. I think too often we think the principal, like, it's about me, you know, you have the power and you're the leader in the school. And so people assume that if you're not in a great mood or you're frustrated, it's because they did something wrong or you don't like what they're doing.
Right.
And so I love that you've created that culture where your teachers can say to you, are you okay? What's happened? And kind of push you to think about, you know, your affect, and then also to check on you, because you also need people as the principal to make sure that, and that's how we build relationships. That's how we get better for one another, is being open and not making those assumptions.
And I appreciate her. She had enough care and concern to, like, check on me. And that meant a lot. It really did. And I told her that.
Yeah, I think relationships are reciprocated. A lot of times, you know, like, I hate this saying so much when people say, that's why you make the big bucks. Well, you know what? I go home at night and like, you know, like, people have families, people struggle. Yeah. And just, you know, if a principal makes a little bit more money, it's not open season just to crap on them all the time.
Absolutely.
And I think that we have to understand that, yeah, people are bosses, but, you know, like, we always want to treat people as human beings that, you know, have issues, have, you know, things that are going on in their life. And we don't just disregard them because of where they are on, you know, the state of education. So I think I do appreciate that, because I always talk about, like, relationships are back and forth. It's not just a pointing down issue. Right.
And I'm slowly building stronger relationships with staff members. And again, I think our one-on-ones and our small group meetings are helping quite a bit. It's still tough to not get defensive when like I get monthly feedback or monthly concerns about a topic that I think like, man, this is really not that serious. So it's hard not to get defensive, but also know I'd rather deal with a small, what may seem like a small petty issue to me, but maybe big to somebody else. Because if I don't address it when it's small, it will become big. And that's still hard. That's still a hard pill to swallow, because like, man, we're spending time dealing with this issue when it could be only one person, or it could be like 2 or 3 people as opposed to an entire staff. And it's hard to figure out, is this a staff issue, or is this an individual issue? But that should that really matter either? So I struggle with that from time to time as well.
I so appreciate your vulnerability, Dwight. Like, I think it's really good to see, and I know a lot of people that are mentioning it in the chat. And like when Dwight asked me, he's like, "Hey, do I need to prepare anything?" I know, so we just want to have a talk, because I think that you get way more authentic conversations when you just kind of go with some of the stuff you're saying. So I just appreciate this. One of the things that I kind of want to tie into the part 3 of the book is professional learning opportunities and what they look like. And so I know that's really crucial when you talk about the notion of like what's in your space, talking about disruption. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you've done for professional learning in your school that has helped move your school, be more open to trying new things in the classroom?
When your book came out, we had a Voxer book chat. And so I invited the entire district to be a part of that book chat. And I think there was, 5 or 6 teachers from my building who participated in that. And that was a unique thing to most people on the staff, because they've never, number one, they never heard of Voxer. Number 2, they never thought we can use that as a book chat. And we also got credit for it, which was unique. So it was like teachers participating, reading the chapter, giving some feedback, and then posting all those things either on like Twitter or Storify and submitting that to Sioux Falls University for credit was huge. I mean, it was a game changer, because they realized they didn't have to go to a physical location to get PD done to them. They were deciding the topics that they want, what they wanted to talk about, how they want to participate, and how often they participated. And just like some other schools, we have breakout sessions where teachers lead sessions. So I'm not always the one talking. My assistant principals aren't always the ones talking. I think there's more impact when it's a colleague leading another or group of colleagues, because they're known, they're trusted. It takes the notion away those aren't my kids, they don't know me, it's not my grade level, it's all in house. And we have experts, through in this building. So let's tap into them, let's use them. And that's gone over really well. And a prime example, I love that. Prime example, we had a group of teachers attend. This year we hosted the Buck Institute PBL conference on my campus. We had like 14, 15 different schools here. It was huge. And I had about 20 teachers participate in PBL. If I would have talked about project-based learning and being at the conference and my perspective, it'd have been like, oh yeah, that's nice. But because my English department chair, she passionately and just phenomenally shared what she learned and what the process is like, more questions came up. Well, how do we learn more about it? What can we do? Well, I mean, it just took off. So she became the in-house expert on PBL. And that's because she's a respected educator, and she did a great job of preparing, and she was able to answer people's questions. And now if they have any questions, they go to her. And also have a national presenter on staff of PBL. He presented at this conference, and most teachers who attended that were from the building, they never knew he had that skill set. So now he's not just a national expert on PBL, he's a building expert on PBL. So it was nice to give him that showcase.
And I think that one of the things I really appreciate that you said, Dwight, is like there are experts in your building, and this is something that we don't tap into enough. And I actually, when I was a principal, I don't know if I've shared this story either. You're bringing out something different to me, Dwight. I really got into like Covey stuff, Leader in Me, and I thought it was really great. And especially Leader in Me is kind of targeted towards elementary schools. And I like read the book, totally loved it. And so, that became a really important aspect of my language is, focusing on how do we develop students as leaders? And so we talked about actually implementation of that in our school.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually took a group of teachers to a school, a Leader in Me school. And this is not a knock on the program. I think there's a lot of great benefits to us, but what we saw, there's just something that didn't fit right with our community, that it didn't feel right. And so it was like a 4 or 5 hour drive. And even though I was like really into it, and when I talked to my teachers and my staff, the people that are actually in the classrooms with the students, I kind of felt like this wasn't for us. And instead of being like, well, this is what I believe and I'm the principal, I kind of said, you know what, I'm actually good with this. Like you came with me, we saw this. And I think that's a really important thing that we show as leaders, that we're willing, you know, that we could be really excited about something, but, you know, when our feedback from our staff, you know, shows that maybe that's not the best pathway for our students, we can take that back.
Right.
And please don't take this as like if you're a Leader in Me school, you should be ashamed of yourself right now. That's not the point of the story.
Yeah,
the point of the story is that didn't necessarily work with our community. And
right.
Joe Sanfilippo talks about, like, you can't carbon copy culture. Like, everything has to be unique to your community.
Yeah, every school has its own DNA. I mean, every school. Like a couple years ago, just working with ICLE, I was working to implement the Rigor, Relevance, and Relationships framework. And we started with Rigor as a school. And so we had to spend the first probably 2 months defining what rigor means, and undefining it and then redefining it. But by the end of the year, I felt like we weren't gaining a lot of traction. We weren't making a lot of movement, and I felt like it wasn't being well received. So I just took a step back and listened to the staff and figured out what they really wanted to do, and started really implementing the things that they thought were necessary as opposed to what I thought was necessary. And so this year, you know, like our English department, they wanted to focus on stronger writing literacy skills. So my English department worked with one of my assistant principals, got a trainer in, and they're taking off with it. And like our global language department, they're working on can-do statements, and our science department is working on differentiation in terms of product and process. So each department is working on something different, but it was mainly because the leaders in the department wanted to do that. And I figured if they want to do it and they're experienced at it, and we can support their training, support their resources, and provide the resources they need to do it, then why not? And so it's just.
Well, and Dwight, I think that's super powerful that you brought that up. And I think just in your story and in George's story, referring to the teachers as leaders. And I think that's something that's also really important in George's book, that it's not just sometimes we think administrator equals leader. And both of you talked about teachers who stepped up and shared their experience, and they're in the classroom with kids every day. And so, you know, as you mentioned, providing those opportunities for teachers to make decisions about what's happening and empowering them is super powerful. So I'm wondering, like you mentioned professional learning and empowering them. What other ways do teachers lead on your campus, or what other ways are you providing opportunities for them to connect and share what they're doing with one another?
Every other Monday we have what's called vertical team meetings. So our 7th through 12th grade teachers get together. Now it's 20 minutes, so that's a barrier right there in and of itself. But they've been very productive for most of the departments. They can connect, ask questions, share ideas. Every Wednesday and Thursday, the departments get together, and they'll share best practices. Like, they'll share different ideas that are happening in the classroom. And then when that happens, what I like to see is when other people are doing it the next day or 2 days later. And so they're becoming their own resources, and it's all free. I mean, they don't have to go to a conference. I don't have to get a sub. They're learning from one another. And then one of my teachers, Miss Reichley, Spanish teacher, she took upon herself this year, I want to just go and observe people in the building. Like, nobody asked her to do it, but she felt comfortable enough where she just reached out to others, said, hey, I want to learn. I hear a lot about your class. The kids talk about you as a teacher. Can I just come in during my conference time for 15 or 20 minutes? I think she's visited like 10, maybe 15 teachers already this year. And that's something I've been like, please, somebody do it. And now she's doing, and now other people are like, man, that's a great idea. I can do that too. So she's made it possible, or she's shown that it's possible to do without losing any time. It's just like she's building relationships, and she's also gets to learn and see what other people are doing. We'll have some book chats. We haven't had one this year, but we had one last year. Like I said, 2 years ago when George's book came out, we did that. We'll study some articles together, read some articles, and talk about, what are the big takeaways. And if teachers will submit an article and say, hey, what do you think about this? We'll share it with the staff and have conversations around it. So try to do it as much as possible while still staying focused on our school goals.
So Dwight, I actually hit up the YouTube comments and asked for if anyone has questions. So Katie, you're more than welcome to answer these as well. One of the questions is from Dave, and he asked this: How does Dwight determine how much of his budget to allocate to PD relative to technology and tools being purchased for learning spaces? So like, how do you actually figure out actually the learning process? I think, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this question, like how much do you put into like the actual, like the stuff versus the actual learning about the stuff?
Well, while at my new school, I haven't really focused any of the budget on the stuff. It's all been on just what the department needs. And then the PD is more towards the professional development, going to conferences or getting subs for teachers to have pull-out days. But I haven't spent a lot of money in the last 4 years on the stuff. And that was intentional because we failed a levy my first year. So we had to cut way back. And so what was considered nice to haves, we had to let go of those things and then really heal from that loss, because I lost 25 staff members that first year. So we spent the second year just focusing on, George, you mentioned this, the social emotional well-being of the staff and going through the healing process. And people weren't really engaged. And it's like, let's get this new furniture and these creative ideas. Like that was so far from people's minds. But now, like last year, we had a couple teachers just said, I want to do something different in my room. So we moved some furniture around. I think I budgeted a couple $100 for them to paint their rooms. Got some carpet laid down that came out of the district budget, which was nice. And now they have a nice, creative, innovative space. So it's been very little money allocated towards that.
And I think one of the things that really, and like, I'm gonna be one of the first ones to admit that I used to do this and how stupid of a practice it was, is that a lot of times what I would do is like, hey, here's like 10 tools and like, here's all this choice and blah, blah, blah. And people just are like, seriously, stop. Like, we're not doing anything well. And like a lot of schools, they're so focused on what's next. I'm like, yeah, you're not even doing what you're doing right now any good. So like, why are you talking about next, right? And so there has to be depth in that. And I think, if you serve people, first, you will get way more out of your investment of the stuff in the first place. And I think that, beautiful example you just shared, Dwight, like if your people aren't like even just in the building, like mentally, then who cares what technology you're using? Who cares about all those things? And like this is one of the chapters that, and I keep going back to it, is about relationships, that you can't have anything innovative if you don't have actually relationships with the adults.
Yeah.
Well, and you can't also, what's next for one group or one person isn't always what's next or what's right for everybody.
Yeah.
So I love that, like your example, Dwight, of one department is doing something because that's what their kids need and that's where they are, and you're supporting them and giving them the resources, but it's connected to school goals. I think that we get lost in this, like, I'm going to empower you, so go and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful either. So it's this balance of,
we don't want a bunch of arrows going in 1,000 different directions. Then there's no clarity, there's no consistency, there's no common language and common belief. And that's one thing we're working on as a district as a whole is, common language, common expectations, common values, so to improve our outcomes. And that's been very refreshing. And like people are really jumping in on that because it's all about behavior management, self-behavior management. Mm-hmm. And then all the other stuff comes after that.
I love that.
So when you, and I'm kind of taking Karen Zecca, who shares a ton. She's awesome, does some really great stuff. She kind of asked a question. I'm going to morph a little bit. how do you, just because the context of the situation, you talked about some of the extraneous things that, the levy, having an impact on, the culture. How do you differentiate when this, that's what's really impacting, or you have someone who's just like, they're using that as excuse, and if everything was awesome, they're still going to complain and everything's like, how do you combat the two when you know that sometimes schools hit hard times and complaints, but even when good times, some people will still complain about everything?
Well, I'll take this from Todd Whitaker. He says, always ask your best teachers. And, who your best teachers, just look at their results, look at their relationship with their kids, look at their relationship with their colleagues. And if they're just, nose to the grindstone all day, every day, when those are the teachers who really start to complain, that's when you really know you have an issue. If it's the person who complains about my parking space is too far, my parking space is too close, it's too hot, it's too cold. I wanted Chipotle for lunch. I didn't want Jersey Mike's. I mean, nothing will make them happy. Those are the people you can't really focus on. But if it's like the teacher,
but come on, Jersey Mike's is way better.
Agreed.
Like, come on, that's where you now.
So we all have experienced people like that. Like, it can be too hot, it can be too cold. It doesn't really matter. Something's going to be wrong. So I listen to the teachers who are typically positive every step of the way, but when they start to share their fatigue or their frustration or their concern, then it's time to really listen. And I learned that from one of my teachers named Mrs. Love. My first year, she was very transparent and very honest with me, because I was trying to do the rah-rah, like we were going through this tough time, and I was like, being positive and motivating and trying to be spirited. And she's like, Dwight, we're mourning right now. People want to be able to mourn and not feel guilty about it. And she gave me this book to read. I think it was called Don't Sing to a Crying Heart. And it was like, basically it was like laced with Psalm, the book of Psalms. And it was so powerful. And I was like, man, I didn't realize I was doing that. She's like, no, you have to just acknowledge the fact that things are bad right now. No speech, no quote, no inspirational message is going to change that. And so that was eye-opening for me. So now I try to be very aware of what the staff is feeling, but still, not keep using things that happened 3 or 4 years ago as an excuse as to why we can't move forward. And how do you do that? Again, just listen to the best teachers. They'll tell you if you ask, and they'll tell you because they're the best teachers, they'll tell you. And now those are people you have to listen to.
So Katie and Dwight, I'm going to ask you, we're over the hour time, and I just want to ask you, what's like one final thing you'd like to say to the people listening right now? So Dwight, actually Katie, I gave you a heads up, so we're going to let you go first.
So many takeaways. But I think what resonated from stories tonight is just tap into the experts in your building, tap into the people who are doing the hard work, and stay connected to them, what they need, what they want, what their goals are, and provide that support. And through that, lots is possible.
Dwight?
I would say where I am now, reflection is definitely at the heart of our practice. And if we're not reflecting, then it's hard to really grow and get better. So regardless of the situation you're in, always reflect on what impact you have on that situation, and then how do you control your behavior? Because what we're learning this year is like my response becomes other people's event. So how I respond can create a positive reaction or a negative reaction. And that's a lot of responsibility. And so I have to reflect daily on how am I building a positive school culture or climate.
And I'll give one last story, and this is because Dwight brought this up, but I actually remember a few years ago when I worked in central office, I did basically have like a really bad breakdown, and had to take a few weeks off and was really struggling personally. And my leadership was so amazing through the whole process, checking in on me or giving me space, whatever they felt I needed. And it was really hard to come back. I was actually really struggling because I was kind of embarrassed. And about a week after I returned, they actually asked me to keynote opening day the following year. And it was like a really powerful thing because I was like, God, they're going to think terribly of me. And then they put me in a situation that they built on my strengths. And one of the things I just, really appreciate your humility and vulnerability, Dwight, is that sometimes just one person, one thing believing in you could totally change. And that had a huge impact on my career, having the ability to actually address my own staff. And it was really because of those relationships. And innovation is such a big thing in education, but if you lose sight of relationships and how we have to see each other as human beings, that we struggle, we have, issues at times. And so I just really appreciate the direction that you took us tonight, and really want to thank you for your time. And Katie, as always, thank you for your leadership and all that you do. And I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen, whether it's live, recorded, or on the podcast. Thank you for all you do. I look forward to your contributions. I look forward to some of your blog posts. Thank you, and have a good night. Dwight, thanks again for joining us. Katie, as always, thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Katie.
Good night.
Thanks.